Football has always belonged to one superstar. Pelé, Maradona, Ronaldo, Messi, Cristiano. Every generation eventually chooses its king. But for the first time in decades, football isn't choosing one. It's choosing two. Kylian Mbappe, Erling Haaland. Two completely different players. Two completely different weapons. One destroys you with impossible speed. The other destroys you with impossible efficiency. One hunts space. The other creates fear. One wears white. The other wears sky blue. And together, they're changing what greatness looks like. This season, they haven't simply scored goals. They've terrorized Europe. Every weekend. Another brace. Another hat-trick. Another impossible statistic. Another defender walking off the pitch wondering, what was I supposed to do? Because this isn't just another football rivalry. This could become the defining rivalry of an entire generation. And by the time this video ends, you might realize something even more frightening. One of them might actually finish as the greatest player of this era. But here's the scary part. Everything you've seen so far might only be the beginning, because both of them are getting better. Let's start with Kylian Mbappe, because right now, he isn't just Real Madrid's biggest star. He's becoming the player every defense fears the most. Week after week, the numbers keep getting more ridiculous. Champions League, goal after goal. La Liga, goal after goal. International football, the same story. And that's exactly what makes Mbappe so dangerous. You never know how he's going to hurt you. Give him space. He'll outrun you. Close him down. He'll beat you one-on-one. Force him wide. He'll cut inside and score. Sit deep. He'll punish you from distance. He's no longer just relying on his pace. He's become a complete attacking weapon. A striker. A winger. A creator. A finisher. Sometimes, all in the same match. That's why defenders have stopped asking, how do we stop Mbappe? Instead, they're asking, which version of Mbappe are we facing today? Because every week, he seems to invent another way to score. One match, it's a solo masterpiece. The next, it's a perfectly timed run between two defenders. Then, it's a first-time finish. Then a long-range rocket. Then a composed finish after beating the goalkeeper. There isn't a pattern anymore. And that's the problem. The impossible has become predictable. Every time Mbappe steps onto the pitch, you expect something extraordinary. And somehow, he still manages to exceed those expectations. But here's what's truly terrifying. As unbelievable as Mbappe has been, there's another player putting up numbers that somehow look even less human. Then your eyes move from Madrid to Manchester, and somehow the numbers become even more absurd. Because while Mbappe is terrifying defenders with variety, Erling Haaland is terrifying them with inevitability. Everyone knows exactly what he's about to do. And somehow, nobody can stop it. Week after week, the same story repeats itself. A cross. A through ball. A rebound. One touch. Goal. Another match. Another goal. Another defender left staring into space, wondering how someone so predictable can be so impossible to defend. That's the genius of Erling Haaland. He doesn't hide what he wants to do. He dares you to stop it. And then scores anyway. The statistics almost stop making sense. Champions League. Goals. Premier League. Goals. International football. More goals. Before most seasons even reach their halfway point, Haaland has already built numbers that would be considered a successful season for almost any other striker on the planet. And the frightening part, Those numbers still don't explain why he's so dominant. Quick favor. If you're enjoying documentaries like this, hit the like button. It genuinely helps us make bigger and better football stories. Now, let's continue. The frightening thing about Erling Haaland isn't his speed. It isn't his strength. It isn't even the number of goals he scores. It's what happens before he touches the ball. Ask any defender who's played against him. The panic starts long before the pass is made. Because Haaland doesn't constantly chase the game. He studies it. He waits. He watches defenders lose focus for just a split second. And that's all he needs. One careless step. One late reaction. One defender looking at the ball instead of the man. And suddenly, it's too late. That's why defending Haaland feels so different. Against most strikers, you react. Against Haaland, you're forced to anticipate. And the moment you start guessing, you've already lost. Need him running into open space? He's one of the fastest strikers in world football. Need someone to outmuscle elite center backs? Very few can match his physical dominance. Need a classic number 9 living inside the penalty area? He might be the best on the planet. Need someone to attack crosses? He's there. Need someone to finish first time? He's already moving before everyone else. That's what makes him so terrifying. He doesn't beat defenders in one way. He beats them in every possible way. And that's exactly why his numbers never change. It doesn't matter whether the opponent is fighting for the title or fighting relegation. Whether it's Arsenal, Liverpool, Manchester United, or a newly promoted side, the result somehow feels inevitable. Sooner or later, Erling Haaland finds the net. And that's where this rivalry becomes different from every rivalry we've seen before. Because Mbappe and Haaland aren't just competing against each other. They're carrying the expectations of an entire generation. Every match, every goal, every trophy is shaping the legacy of football's next era. But club football is only half the story. The real pressure begins the moment that Manchester City shirt comes off, and the Norwegian one goes on. Because at club level, great players have great teammates. With your national team, sometimes you are expected to become the difference yourself. And no player understands that responsibility better than Erling Haaland. For more than 2 decades, Norway watched every major tournament from home. Generations came and went. Talented players appeared, then disappeared. The dream never changed. Qualify for the World Cup again. Then Haaland arrived. And suddenly, the impossible started looking inevitable. This wasn't just another qualification campaign. It became one of the greatest individual performances European football has ever witnessed. Every time Norway needed a goal, Haaland delivered. Every time the pressure increased, he answered. 5 against Moldova. A hat-trick against Israel. A decisive brace against Italy. Match after match. He wasn't simply scoring. He was dragging an entire nation toward the World Cup. When qualification finally ended, the numbers looked almost fictional. 16 goals. 8 matches. Exactly 2 goals per game. No player across European qualifying came close. In fact, the gap between Haaland and second place was the same as the gap between second place and many of the players chasing them. That's not dominance. That's complete separation. And perhaps the most impressive part wasn't the statistics. It was the timing. The bigger the moment, the bigger Haaland became. That's the trait every legendary player shares. When the pressure reaches its highest point, they don't disappear. They take control. That's why comparisons with the greatest players in football history are no longer impossible to make. Because every generation reaches a moment when one player becomes the nation. Portugal had Cristiano Ronaldo. Argentina had Lionel Messi. Whenever qualification was on the line, the entire country looked toward one man. That kind of responsibility breaks most footballers. Legends embrace it. And Erling Haaland has done exactly that. He didn't simply score goals. He carried expectations. He carried pressure. He carried the hopes of millions of Norwegians who had waited decades to see their country return to football's biggest stage. That's what separates elite players from generational icons. And on the other side of this rivalry, Kylian Mbappe has been carrying a similar burden for France. His qualification campaign wasn't built on outrageous numbers. It was built on decisive moments. When France needed one final push, their biggest star delivered. Against Ukraine, with a World Cup place on the line, Mbappe scored twice, created another goal, and reminded everyone why the biggest moments almost always belong to the biggest players. That's why watching this rivalry feels so special. Because this isn't simply Manchester City versus Real Madrid, or Norway versus France. It's two players, both carrying the expectations of entire nations, both chasing football immortality, and both refusing to let pressure slow them down. For years, people said they would become the faces of football. That prediction isn't about the future anymore. It's happening right now. Maybe none of this should surprise us, because long before they became rivals, football was already preparing for this moment. While one teenager was setting France on fire, another was quietly growing into a monster in Scandinavia. Mbappe exploded first. At Monaco, he wasn't simply another exciting youngster. He was destroying some of Europe's biggest clubs before he was even old enough to legally rent a car in many countries. Manchester City, Borussia Dortmund, Juventus, one after another. They all witnessed the arrival of football's next superstar. Then came Russia 2018. The stage became bigger. And somehow, Mbappe became even bigger. He didn't just win the World Cup. He became one of the youngest players ever to score in a World Cup final. Overnight, the future had a face. But while Mbappe was lifting football's biggest trophy, another future superstar was writing a completely different story. Thousands of kilometers away, Erling Haaland wasn't dazzling defenders with skill moves. He was terrifying them with goals. 9 goals in one FIFA Youth World Cup match. At first, people thought it was simply a crazy day. It wasn't. It was the first warning. Soon after, he exploded in the Champions League with Salzburg. Hat-tricks. Goals almost every game. Defenders unable to stop him. Then Borussia Dortmund arrived. And instead of slowing down under the pressure, he became even more dangerous. Goals turned into habits. Records became routine. The football world realized something terrifying. There weren't one, but 2 generational talents rising at exactly the same time. One represented elegance. The other represented destruction. Different journeys. Different styles. Exactly the same destination. Football greatness. Since then, the trophies have kept arriving. Golden boots. League titles. Champions League nights. Historic records. Individual awards. One after another. Their careers have continued to climb. But trophies alone don't create football legends. Consistency does. Every generation has seen players explode for one incredible season, only to disappear just as quickly. Football is ruthless. Staying at the top is always harder than reaching it. That is exactly why Mbappe and Haaland are different. Season after season, year after year, they keep proving that greatness wasn't a coincidence. Mbappe keeps evolving into one of the most complete attackers football has ever seen. Haaland keeps redefining what a modern number 9 can look like. One destroys defenses with movement. The other destroys them with speed. One overwhelms you with power. The other overwhelms you with imagination. Different weapons. Same result. Goals. Records. Victory. Even statistically, they're entering territory once reserved for only 2 names. Lionel Messi. Cristiano Ronaldo. For over 15 years, football belonged to those 2 legends. But every era eventually reaches its final chapter. And maybe, without us even realizing it, another one has already begun. Not because Messi or Ronaldo became smaller, but because Mbappe and Haaland became impossible to ignore. Every season, they push each other higher. Every record broken by one becomes motivation for the other. Every trophy won raises the standard again. This isn't simply a rivalry. It's the race that will define an entire football generation. Maybe one of them will win more Ballon d'Ors. Maybe one of them will lift more Champions Leagues. Maybe one of them will leave football with more goals than anyone ever imagined. Nobody knows how this story ends. But one thing already feels certain. The next decade belongs to them. And years from now, when people look back at this era, they won't ask when Mbappe or Haaland became football's biggest stars. They'll ask, who was actually better? So now the question comes to you. If you could build one team and choose only one player, who are you taking? Kylian Mbappe or Erling Haaland?